So, what is safeguarding and why is it relevant to events and festivals? So if I think about kind of how I've tried to structure what this definition looks like, it's been a bit of a challenge because I'm very conscious of this being a kind of global audience, and majority of my experience kind of comes from Europe. But there are a few standout statements that are kind of present across all safeguarding definitions in the majority of the world, and that's protecting individuals' health, well-being, and kind of right to safety. I think it gets a little bit more complex, though, when we move into the kind of second line of that definition, though, because we then look at free from harm, abuse, and neglect, and this is where the safeguarding stuff really starts to stand out. There is a standout kind of, I guess, global statement that exists within majority of countries, though, and that's that safeguarding is everybody's responsibility. So I've kind of sometimes stepped into event spaces where I've sort of asked about policy, kind of who looks after safeguarding within the event. And there's always been a bit of that sort of aligns here or that aligns there, as opposed to kind of taking that approach of actually safeguarding kind of sits with all of us within all of the event spaces that we're in. And as I kind of mentioned, there's been sort of escalating complexities within kind of communities and within event spaces. I've got a fab colleague, Lee Harvey, who said on a meeting quite recently that safeguarding never stands still. And I just love that kind of statement. I mean, I think from a kind of safeguarding officer perspective, that's quite relevant. I think often if you see safeguarding staff within events, they're usually running around like headless chickens. But I think what's really being referenced there is the fact that safeguarding is always escalating, it's always changing, the complexities are changing, the approaches, the legislation, it's never really standing still. So thanks, Lee, for that one. I'm definitely going to be using that one moving forward. How do we then support people within those spaces? What do we do? What policies do we implement? What processes? I guess this all really starts with having a safeguarding policy. Kind of mentioned about sometimes there seems to be a bit of a tussle, if you like, between events about how to implement a safeguarding policy. And they might say, well, the welfare team have a safeguarding policy, the medical team have a safeguarding policy. But as we spoke about earlier, safeguarding is everybody's responsibility, particularly in our kind of event spaces. We've got lots of different individuals who could potentially be responding to a safeguarding concern. They don't always land in the places that they're supposed to land. And that's the kind of nature of working with humans. So having a policy that kind of regulates everybody's approach to safeguarding is really, really important. And it's actually something that we're seeing popping up more so with kind of licensing agreements, with some of the safety advisory groups, that there is actually a need to have things like safeguarding policies, etc., on site. Questions always come up around child protection. For me, when we're talking about processes and policies attached to lost children or found children, and how we kind of deal with some of those. But there's another end to kind of safeguarding around transitional age ranges. So a lot of the time, this can be those that are aged sort of 16 and 17. So for example, we quite often see events that have opened their doors up to unaccompanied 16 and 17-year-olds, which can be a really complex and quite challenging world to navigate. I guess on the basis that a lot of legal structures are designed to protect those under the age of 18. So there's still elements attached to safeguarding with that 16, 17-year-old age range, despite the fact that the kind of event is, I guess, kind of viewing them as an adult within that space. So there can be some kind of challenges that come off the back of that. Intoxicated male 27 escorted to the ejection centre following an altercation with another patron. Very agitated. The staff handle it very well, though. Lots of dignity, respect. The guy's just not calming down. Judgment call is made that he needs to be evicted, needs off-site, and then this is based on their kind of evictions policy. Is escorted to the assigned gate as per the policy, removed from the site. A few hours later, though, there's a road traffic collision on a rural country road just outside of the event, where a pedestrian is struck by a vehicle and is in a critical condition. So whilst the male was treated with kind of dignity and respect, there wasn't a formal process actually in place with this event to actually identify if there are any capacity or vulnerability issues. So the male had money and a phone, so it was assumed he can kind of get home fine, but actually the level of intoxication and his understanding about what was happening was really, really impaired. It's later discovered that the pedestrian is the male that was evicted from the site earlier. This results in the event needing to introduce a range of kind of vulnerability assessment measures, particularly for ejections, thinking about the nature of the event and where it was kind of positioned within the rural setting, but also surrounded by quite busy rural unlit roads, for example. There were quite a lot of kind of complexities that came with that after the event, as opposed to it being about what happened actually on the particular day. Over the duration of a weekend, the medical and welfare teams receive a number of presentations. Individuals are demonstrating extreme levels of paranoia, including erratic behaviour, very concerning statements. A particular male expresses he believes there's a deceased infant buried under his tent. Female expresses that she believes her partner is recording and exposing her. Male screaming that a member of the welfare staff has a knife. Escalations and presentations just continue over several hours, resulting in a very overwhelmed kind of number of services, not just welfare. You've got the medical team were becoming overwhelmed with these issues, security, etc. Things to note: bringing security and a police presence into that space appears to make the situation a lot worse. It increases the level of paranoia, again making the situation a lot more difficult to manage. There is a back of house drug testing facility available at this particular event. However, there's quite a significant backlog of substances that have been brought forward for amnesty or via seizure upon entry. So a coordinated approach is developed, sensitive and general conversations resulting in amnesty of a substance. So I was able to sit down and obtain a sample for testing. This shows the substance N-ethylpentalone, which is a cathinone that's got some very extreme side effects. From this test, they were able to generate a site-wide alert and a plan to support those in current crisis. So, for example, working with the medical team to look at if there's kind of benzodiazepines that can be prescribed or given to individuals in order to kind of calm the situation down, resulting in reducing the likelihood of services becoming further overwhelmed. It's always really helpful to consider what the debrief process kind of looks like. How do you have debriefs generally? I appreciate there's a lot that happen, but are there any specifics that you would undertake in relation to safeguarding or kind of looking at the responses to kind of trauma or crisis management within spaces? It's always good to think about a learning culture and not a blame culture. So when I was going through those examples, there are levels of obviously accountability within certain functions, but actually thinking about how can we learn from this, be that to stop it happening again, or if there's any learning that can be taken where should, I suppose, similar nature kind of incidents occur, how we can better support individuals and staff as well. What was within our control? A lot of the time safeguarding incidents can't be risk assessed for. We're working with humans. So, was there anything within our control and what was out of our control? And are there any additional mitigations we can put in? How do we support the staff involved, particularly when we're looking at some of those trauma kind of crisis type issues that occur, can take its toll on the individuals that are involved with those processes? What does learning look like? How do we implement it? How do we make sure that these debrief processes aren't, tokenistic? How do we embed things? How do we amend policies, amend processes to reflect the learning? And also, what level of recording and monitoring are we taking? So if we're actually responding to safeguarding incidents, where are we recording them? Where are we noting what's happened? Do you have a process that's a paper process? Are you using platforms like Halo, for example? What does that recording kind of look like, and how can we reaccess some of the monitoring to make sure that we can consider that as part of that kind of aftermath debrief process? Which kind of brings me to the sort of end statement for me, which is around being trauma-informed. The process of being trauma-informed and working in a kind of trauma-informed workplace is that of considering that we all bring trauma into spaces. We've all got complex lives, you know, we've all experienced things. I think particularly when we're working in organised events, festivals, we deal with really complex, challenging issues, and we want to be able to step away from those environments feeling okay. And we want our patrons to walk away from those environments having had a good time and feeling well. And even if they have experienced something of great kind of trauma, etc., that's been well handled. And that brings us to, I guess, bringing a sense of physical and psychological safety